Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another Without Lies, Islam Dies, when we break down and analyse the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, my favourite book of all time, apart from the Bible. But we're not going to do that just on its own. We're also going to continue going through the Reliance of the Traveller, which is the full sacred law of Islam in the current day. This is what they currently use. We're through the first 4 points so far. We've learned an awful lot. And in doing so, unravel the deceit underpinning the evil religion of Islam and the reason why it's a problem for us in our lives here today. So we're going to continue with that. Let's just recap what we've gone through very quickly. Rule 1, which we went through 3 episodes ago. Rule 1 is you should all be Muslims because it's a moral obligation and a legal obligation, despite the fact that you're in your own country, because Allah says so. And that means you have to be dominated by the superior being of the Muslim man. And the reason the Muslim man has supererogatory power over you, which is what Allah calls it, is because you are ignorant and your hearts are blind, deaf and dumb. You have no wisdom and no soul until you take your Shahada and you become a Muslim. And it is priority number 1 for the Muslim to enforce this upon you in your land, so that it can be taken back from you because you must have stole it off Allah. That's rule number 1. And we know that that is the reason their law is called Reliance of the Traveller, because the obligation we're talking about is the obligation Allah puts on his Muslims to come here to our countries and teach us this, to remove our ignorance and our blindness so that we surrender to Allah and become Muslims. And if we refuse, off your head, you're dead, torture for your family, hell forever, burning in fire. That's rule 1 and 2. It's obviously a very cheerful society in the Arab Islamic world, so, you know, they're not as maybe honest as they should be about this, which is why they have this book. This book is the cover. This book is a black linen that they throw over the Quran in order that they can slyly position themselves in our countries and then finally spring stage 3 of the jihad and take over completely, as described in the Quran. We're currently at stage 2. That's what we know from reading this. So that's 1, 2 and 3. 4 was just a kind of further detailing on point 2, which says nothing that you will learn in a Western culture is going to be good for you. That stuff's forbidden. None of the technology that the Westerners have is going to be good for you. That is also forbidden. And if you have any arguments, questions or doubts, you are an idolater and an apostate, and that is punishable by, and I quote, severe torture for you, rejection and condemnation of blame for your fellows, which means your family and anyone who presumably will agree with you. And it's priority number 1 for the Muslim to seek you out in your own home and your country, tell you about this, because the second he has told you about this in any way, he doesn't have to completely tell you about it, he just has to tell you it's your fault if you don't. From that point onwards, you are obligated to follow this, And if you don't, you'll be severely tortured and killed, and so will your families. That's 1 to 4. Keeping up, it's a lot of fun. So we're going to go from point 5, law number 5 in the Reliance of the Traveller. I also have my Quran here, but I'm not going to refer to it because we're going to need this in the next few episodes, so I've already got my notations done. So that brings us up to speed. Let's get going and pick up where we left off with law A5, which is called communally obligated learnings. Now, communally obligated learning sounds like a kind of jangly term, you know, like you might not know what that means. The reason they're specifically saying communally obligated learning is because that stuff that we went through, law 1 to 4, that's individually obligated, morally obligated for you individually. These are communal obligations which you as a good Muslim, or as a good Dhimmi Muslim, you know, a slave of a Muslim, these are the obligations you are expected to put on the kufir, the non-Muslims. So that's going to be rule 5. So let's get started. Rule 5.1. Moral men endowed with a heart free from unlawful disease, which is, as we know from reading Al-Baqarah, Allah disease. Allah disease is when you don't agree that Allah is God, or you don't worship him, and he mind controls you, and he seals your heart with a disease, which causes you to become morally deaf, dumb, and blind, and have no wisdom. And then you will saunter off towards Satan and become a very bad person with no soul, and in which case you are the enemy of good Muslim men from that point onwards, and there's no coming back from it. So, moral men endowed with a heart free from unlawful Allah disease are to serve Muslim men by way of keeping communally obligated learning, and the obligated period of learning shall continue until the day of judgment. Right, so what we can tell from this is there is now an obligated period where this law is relevant, and that period ends when the day of judgment is reached. And we also know from reading this, Surah 5 up until 10, the day of judgment is reached when the last head is separated from the last Christian, Jew, and the last apostate. So that's what this is describing. So let's go through it from the top, because it's a little bit complicated and we just started, you know, we just got started. So rule 5.1 goes like this. Communally obligated learning means obligations that you as a Muslim will put upon non-Muslims by force, because it's now their obligation through you living near them. And it's called obligated learning because they're obligated to learn and do this stuff because you're not allowed to as a Muslim. Because remember, if we track back, the last thing we were talking about is the blaming of seeking evil with corrupted Kufi knowledge, which is everything that's outside of the Quran. So everything that they do, modern medicine, technology, astronomy, aerospace engineering, material science, applied sciences, computing, AI generations, all of these things are well outside of the remit of the Quran. And this is the only thing they're allowed to do. So in order for Muslims to have access to those things, they need to have dhimmi slaves, non-Muslims who are not Christians or Jews, who don't have any opposition to Islam but are not believers. And they need to communally obligate those guys into serving them, doing the things they're not allowed to do. So in that way, Muslims can have nuclear weapons, missile weapons, cars, trucks, aeroplanes, computers, different styles of clothing outside of what Muhammad wore, and they can profit from these ventures without having upset Allah. That's why it's communally obligated out to other people. They can supervise it, as we'll find out, but they're not allowed to participate in it. They can only own it as a business or run it as a supervisory thing. So, from the top, 5.1. Moral men endowed with a heart free from unlawful disease, you know, so they're not Muslims, but they haven't got Allah disease, they're kind of middlemen, are to serve Muslim men by way of keeping communally obligated learning, as we went through all the aerospace, technology, AI. And this will be happening until the obligation period is at an end, which is the judgment day. So What that means is, although you haven't got Allah disease, you little middlemen who are not opposed to Islam, you dhimmis, you are going to be servants now until the obligation period ends, which is the judgment day. On the judgment day, you will be killed also because you are not a faithful, obedient Muslim. So even though you've been paying your jizyas, you've been serving these Muslims really well, you've let them have all your technology, you've read all the books they weren't allowed to read, you pushed all the buttons they weren't allowed to push, you spread the dawah for them so they get away with doing less prayers and less fasting, and you thought this meant you and your family would be safe. No, it doesn't mean that. It means you will be the final victims of the jihad murdering spree before the judgment day is reached. And we know that because the Quran actually dictates that this is how the paradise is created. The paradise cannot exist while a Christian, a Jew, or an apostate still dwells upon the earth. Right? So that means we all have to be exterminated in order for the paradise to be a thing. And at the moment, Muhammad and all the other Islamic dead guys are not in the paradise. They're in a kind of middle space where they are spiritually fighting the jihad with the living Muslims. And the ones that didn't want to do it are forever grave tortured by Allah. They're in the grave, eyeballs hanging out, they're like in their bodies but unable to move. And Allah is like, yeah, like scaring them or something. That's what's happening to them. Everybody else is part of the jihad, dead or alive, they're still in a war with the Jews and Christians and apostates. And that goes on until the end of the period of obligation. And that's when these dhimmis will be exterminated along with everyone else. So that's 5.1. 5.2 goes into a little bit more detail about what these areas of learning are, which are outside of the Quran. So we actually got told in the first 4 laws, Muslims, this stuff is evil, you're not allowed to do it. This stuff is condemned. When we've had no use for it, it will be destroyed and, it will be condemned with blame. We'll say that it's evil. But until the period of obligation ends, we can get other guys to do it for us. And that's okay. So 5.2 describes how that's going to happen. 5.2. These are the areas of learning not described in the sacred guiding wisdom, in the Quran, that are required for the society to be sustained during the period of sustainment. These include medicine, mathematics, construction, agriculture, aerospace, and lexicology. And that's the end of 5.2. So let's go through that. 5.1 says, well, let's go through it from the beginning. 1 to 4 says, Muslims, you're not allowed to do anything outside the Quran, or you will be evil, and you will burn, and will torture your family and kill you, and you will never get to paradise, you won't get your virgins, Allah won't love you. Right, so the first thing is, you're not allowed to do Western stuff, Muslims. Western stuff is all evil. Westerners are all evil. We have to kill those guys. 5 is, but if we need those guys and their Western stuff, we can still use it as long as we have slaves that are not Christians or Jews. So atheists and all those... Apologies for my idiot neighbour with his motorbike. He still lives in the body of a... He still thinks he's like 12, He's still trying to impress chicks by wheeling down the road. Fucking idiot. Anyway, so 5.1 is moral men endowed with a heart free from Allah disease who are not Muslims. They're the guys we're going to get to run our weed grows. They're the guys we're going to get to run our weapons programs. They're the guys we're going to get to do the non-Quran stuff we're not allowed to do. And until the obligation period ends, when we murder them all because they're not Muslims, we have to supervise them. And that is how, even though we're not getting our hands dirty by, for instance, selling bacon sandwiches or working in a library where there's arts and music, we can still use and profit from those things without getting our little Muslim hands dirty, and we're supervising it. So we are the beneficiaries, and the profits that come from it still go to the jihad fund. That's 5.1. 5.2 says, these are the areas of learning not described in the sacred guiding wisdom, which is this book, such as medicine, mathematics, construction, agriculture, lexicology. Now, what is lexicology? Lexicon means different books. Lexicology is the study of many books and learning things from the history of the world that's held within books. So even though we know from the earlier 1 to 4, rule 1 to 4, which is taken from the Quran, Allah said this himself, Muslims are expressly forbidden from reading those books, right? Because they're Western and they're evil and they're not from the Quran. So that means they're not wise, they're not sacred guiding knowledge, they're bad and they should be condemned. Even so, you can have Westerners do the lexicology for you and then feed you the information back. And that means that information is considered to be Quranic knowledge. Because the bit of the evil stuff of extracting the knowledge, the evil stuff of doing the work, because you're not allowed to do agriculture, you're not allowed to do project work, you're not allowed to work with other people. You're not, as a Muslim, allowed to do anything outside of thinking about jihad, teaching about jihad, doing the dawah on the Westerners. That's it. That's all you're allowed to do in service of Allah's cause of perfecting the jihad against the West and crushing all other people. However, if you've got Dhimmi slaves, they can do all that stuff for you and they can filter that information back to you. Then when you wipe them out, the records will say, you already had that knowledge. Allah gave it to you. And that's how it's described in rule number 6, which we will get to. Are you keeping up? So far we've got Muslims don't do XYZ thing, don't eat this food, don't go to these buildings, don't hang out with these people, but take over their countries, but don't use any of their stuff because it's evil and Allah didn't give it to you. Then rule 5 is, well, but if you can't beat them because they've got all this cool technology and stuff, just enslave some of them and get them to give you that technology and get them to get their hands dirty, then kill them and keep the stuff, then you can say that Allah gave it to you, right? And 5.2 is describing what that's going to be. And then saying this is only up until the judgment day when we wipe all these guys out anyway. And the stuff that is described is science, medicine, construction, agriculture, books. All stuff that the Quran prevents you having and says the guys that wrote those books are evil and should be condemned and killed. But as long as they read it to you, then you kill them, you can have that knowledge. So it's all very, very sneaky. So this is how Islamic society makes progress. It doesn't research things. It doesn't find things out. It doesn't learn things. It enslaves people that do that for them and then kills them and keeps the knowledge. It's unbelievable that this is... Our governments are severely... They need to come up with a good excuse why they allowed this to happen. Because we could be overthrowing our government because of this. The fact is, they should have told us this. When we were doing our Brexit vote in 2016, we should have known this. If people would have known this, it wouldn't have been a 60% win, it would have been a 100% win. But they didn't fucking tell us. So anyway, let's carry on. Rule number 6. Recommended knowledge in Islam. Supererogatory learning of an in-depth knowledge. Now, we went through yesterday, supererogatory means you have power over someone else, given to you by someone else. So the superpower is Allah. You're the vizier who's getting the supererogatory power given down to you. And you're going to be using that power on the lowly kuffar and the dhimmis below you, right? So recommended knowledge is, this is the stuff that you recommend the dhimmi slaves to do for you, that you are not as a Muslim allowed to do. That's where we're going with this. So, supererogatory learning of an in-depth knowledge, i.e. medicine, mathematics, construction, agriculture, lexicology, science, beyond that which is required for communal obligation, like so it's stuff that you don't need the dhimmis to do for you, but you just think it's going to be useful for you, is to be strictly supervised only by Muslims versed in that which is complementary to ordinary wisdom and Quranic worship. So, oh yeah, and then it says, your questions about this shall be put to ground and not ever asked, for Allah knows better than you. End of verse. Right, so let's go through that. This is, if you ever needed one verse that's going to completely describe to you the attitude and mindset of the modern everyday Muslim, this is it. So pay attention. Supererogatory learning of an in-depth knowledge beyond that which is required for the communal obligation of your dhimmi slaves is to be strictly supervised only by Muslims versed in that which is complementary to ordinary Quranic scholarship and wisdom, right? So what that means is you're allowed to have dhimmi slaves doing stuff that's not Quranic as long as you agree you're going to kill them in the Judgment Day. You can also have people doing stuff that is not required for Islam if it's part of a greater jihad. For instance, you can have sex slaves making you money if it's paying for the obligatory stuff. You can have drug dealers paying for the obligatory stuff. And you have all of it done by non-Muslims, supervised by an imam. That's what it's saying. The only part of this whole operation that's going to involve a Muslim is taking the profits and the information and supervising. So if anyone ever gets accused of any of these crimes, or if any of this stuff ever gets questioned, condemnation of blame is upon them, not the Muslims. Understand that. So they are organised crime rings with the intent of sucking up all that Western goodness which they're not Quranically allowed to have, and they are just supervising it. So at some time in the future, they can then purposefully destroy it along with all the people involved and get away from the blame. So now, when the police make a big drug bust of like 50 guys and they find sex slaves and they find like bomb-making materials and they find like 4 Polish guys who they're going to blame for it, now you know why your mind says, why are 4 Polish guys keeping 150 sex slaves and a bunch of bomb-making materials and a bunch of Qurans? That doesn't make sense. Why would 4 Polish guys do it? Now we know why. And then obviously the media go, these 4 Polish guys, they're Nazis, they're just Islamophobes, they just want to make Islam look bad. That's the reason they're doing it. Case closed, move on, nothing to see here. No, no, no. We know from 5 and 6 laws which Islam is obligated to do. Every Muslim is obligated to do this all of the time. And remember, there's no reward for doing it. There is a punishment for refusing to do it, which is death, severe tortures of you and your family. So they are doing this all of the time. That is law 6. And then it quantifies it further. Because of the last bit that says, this is all to be strictly supervised only by Muslims versed in the complementary ordinary wisdom, you know, the ones who are the imams, that they know the stuff. But even they are told, your questions shall not be put to ground and asked, for Allah knows better than you. So that means even the imams are going to think, hang on a minute, we're not allowed to do this stuff. The Quran calls this stuff evil. We're not allowed to do that. No, as an imam, you are now obligated to get other people to do that and not ask any questions. Because if you ask any questions, you are now saying Allah doesn't know better than you. So you're saying you know better than Allah if you don't do this but not ask any questions. And that makes you a what? Yes, that's right. It makes you an idolater and an apostate. And we know what happens to them. Off with your head, you're fucking dead. And so are your family. So you won't be doing that. You'll be supervising it with the intent of dropping these guys in it later and getting them all caught. And then condemning them as part of the evil Western culture so that your Muslim culture can be installed over the top with no blame. That's rule 6. It actually goes as far as quoting a specific Quran verse here, which my Christian brothers and sisters will love this. Guess which Quran verse we're going to get? 666. That's interesting they quote that one, isn't it? And 666 in the Quran says, and I quote, O ye believers, protect yourself and your family from the evil fire of Allah, and always obey your Lord. That's it. That's the whole verse. So obviously the imams are going, I'm not sure about this. Are you sure Allah told us to do this? And then they're told, Allah wants you to do this, and if you don't do it, you will need protection from Allah's evil fire. Obey your Lord. Right? So even the imams aren't allowed to question this. If they do, they're dead. And other Muslims come and kill them. So it's brainwashing. Where the Muslim sees a brother drawn to Ghazali. Now, do you know what Ghazali is? Bet you don't. Gaza is the Islamic word for prideful. Arrogant, boisterous, forward and loud, right? So that's Ghazali means if you're being prideful, if you're being too arrogant, if you're being too super confident in your own greatness. You're forgetting that you're supposed to be humble to Allah. And that's how 6 is capped off. After the O ye believers, protect yourself from Allah's fire, where the Muslim sees a brother drawn to Ghazali. So when these imams are running their sex rings and their drug rings and they're like gangster mafia bosses with all these people working under them, and then they drop those guys in it and hand them all over to the police for bravery medals sometimes for the Muslims, even though they were running it and supervising it, when they have dredged that information and money out, or they feel like the jig is up, they're going to get caught, they can drop those guys in it on purpose and take the acclaim for having solved those crimes, even though they were running it. When that happens, they will become prideful, even though it's a fucking trick and they shouldn't be prideful about it. It's disgusting and shameful. Nobody's going to know that, not even other Muslims. So when they become prideful and they suffer Ghazali, 6.2, where the Muslim sees another brother drawn into Ghazali, immediately report this to your imam. These reports must be made alongside individual warnings. So when you see the Muslim having a Ghazali pride fit, because he's just screwed over a bunch of Westerners and he's done a great jihad, even though it's shameful, he will be saying, I am Allah's greatest warrior, or something like that. He'll be kissing his own backside. Other Muslims have to go up to him and go, excuse me, good sir, Allah's the one that did that, not you. And if I see you being prideful like that again, I will tell other imams that you think you're better than Allah and that you need to go to the evil fire with your fellows. And the reason this happens is so that although the imams are incredibly powerful in terms of the Muslims, in terms of each other, they are the Muslims, right? So it's triangle marketing. You've got the peasant Muslims at the bottom, you've got the imam level here, then you've got the super imams who live in the Arabian countries, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, these kind of guys, who are the arbiters of the normal imams. Then you've got the Ayatollah, the Muslim Brotherhood guys, and the Islamic Institute of Thought in North America as the top guys. Then you've got Muhammad. Nobody gets above him apart from Allah. So it is literally triangle marketing, like double glazing sale with death and destruction. That's point 6. So, now, point 7 is the one I really wanted to get up to. In fact, we'll go through it at the end. We'll carry on. We're going at a good pace here. 26 minutes, we've got plenty of time. So we're on the last law we're going to go through today, law number 7, which is just one page, so it should be quick. Law 7 concerns subjects of learning outside of the sacred or the obligatory. So this is subjects outside of the sacred for you, stuff you're not allowed to know as a Muslim, and outside of the stuff which is communally obligated in either of the cases of support or direct funding for the jihad. Right? So this is stuff that's definitely not allowed for anyone. That's where we're going. 7.1. Considered to be sorcery are the following subjects and must not be participated at all by any Muslim or supervised by any regular Muslim until the end of the obligation period. So breaking that down, these things that are going to be listed in 7.2 are considered to be evil, magic, sorcery, biggest crimes you can ever imagine. The following subjects must not be participated in by any Muslim, any normal Muslim, only supervised by the top imams, right? So even normal imams must stay away from these. Only the real top guys, the real mafia boss imams, are allowed to supervise this. And you're not allowed to ask questions or know why. As far as a normal Muslim on the street is concerned, this stuff never happens. Only the Ayatollah and his guys are allowed to do this stuff. The real top guys. So, and that's until the end of the obligation period. None of this stuff's going to matter at the end of the obligation period. When the jihad is complete and the entire world is exterminated and destroyed and they have tilled the earth down, they've broken up the earth and destroyed everything, and the only thing that's left is fire and Muslims, at that point they will not need a society, because that is when Allah's going to come down and create the paradise on the earth. You know, he's going to split the moon, fly down on a unicorn, proclaim Islamic paradise for everyone who's there, and burn away and judge everyone who didn't do a jihad effectively. You know, the Muslims that didn't help to get there, they're dead. And only the jihad Muslims will remain with their 72 virginal brides in a big tent who don't talk. Don't believe me, buy it and read it yourself. That is how Allah describes his paradise. It's a big tent full of robotic virginal brides, and you get like 72 if you're a really good Muslim. You get considerably fewer than that if you're not as good of a Muslim as the jihadis. But you get an amount of robotic virginal brides who regenerate every day after you have had sex with them, because obviously they're not virgins anymore once you've had sex with them. And the only features of Islamic paradise are a great holy golden mosque, which is hidden from the world apart from the Muslims who go there, and a river of honey. That is the paradise. You know, oh yeah, it's got trees and stuff. So that's what we're going towards, the end of the obligation period, when everyone else gets exterminated apart from the jihadi Muslims, and then Allah will make the paradise on earth. That's why this stuff is having to be forbidden, because if this stuff is used by those jihadi Muslims, then they will be stricken from it and they will never get to the paradise unless they're under instruction from the top level imam, which is why this rule exists. So let's go through 7.2. These are the absolutely forbidden things which no Muslim is ever allowed to touch unless he's one of the top guys and you don't know why he's doing it. It's like a top secret mafia project. Magic. Magic is described as non-Islamic studies of faith and religion. So me studying the Bible is magic. That's like the worst sin ever. Mysticism, teaching of sorceries and religions and other faiths. So bishops, deacons, priests, evangelists, Christian speakers, just gobby normal Christians like myself, we are now magic and we're mystics. So we're twice condemned. Philosophy and non-Islamic theology. Now, what's philosophy? Philosophy is the thought study of why something's good and why something's bad and whether it should be good or bad. So we know from the Quran, Allah has already told Muslims what is good and what is bad, and that will never change. Therefore, philosophy and non-Islamic theology is in contradiction as a general topic to Quranic study, and therefore it's completely evil. Astrology and astronomy, except by supervision. So, Muslims on the ground, normal everyday Muslims, are not allowed to learn astrology. They're not allowed to get involved in astronomy or the areas of materials science and applied practical sciences which go along with that, except by supervision of the mafioso top imams, you know, Ayatollah and his guys doing the nuclear science. They're allowed to, for some reason, even though no one else is, but you're not allowed to know the details of it or you'll go to hell, so don't ask. And the last two are material sciences, except by supervision, and anything which contradicts Islam as a general topic. So anything at all that contradicts Islam is completely bad, evil, and seen as a magic, which should be completely condemned and avoided and not spoken about. So me making this video is magic. As far as the Islam faith is concerned, me and this is, I am now a sorcerer. I'm a wizard. I'm like fucking Gandalf. Daily Gandalf. That's going to be my new channel name. The Without Lies, Islam Dies is going in the bin. It's now going to be Gandalf's Mysticism Studies. You know, it's like flipping Hogwarts or something. That's how Muslims see us doing this. And now you, listening to this, you're teetering on the edge of being burnt forever in hell because you are learning from me and you should be ignoring me. You should be going, la la, I can't hear you, and ignoring me and then condemning me with violence. So, that's the end of Rule 7. 33 minutes on the dot. Perfect. Let's go back through it. So, we started off with 5, communally obligated learning, which is how Muslims will designate moral non-Muslims, the Dhimmis, and give out the work to them which is prevented from them in the Quran, so they're not allowed to do it. producing and selling bacon, producing and using nuclear weapons, producing and using cars, being lawyers, being engineers, being teachers that are not Islamic teachers. These things are expressly prevented in Quran, but Muslims know in order to dominate Western culture, they also need to become dominant of these sectors, these areas: agriculture, military, education, health, societal philosophy. So since they're completely prevented from doing it, and if they get caught doing it, off with your head, you're dead, and so is your family, they enlist Dhimmi, which means non-Muslims who are not Jews or Christians who agree to the principle of Islam being a nice, friendly religion of peace without believing in Allah. So they're allowed to do the Dhimmi stuff because they're not Muslims, and they give the results of that to the Muslim, and therefore the Muslim has benefited from this magical, mystical, evil stuff without getting his own hands dirty. And then a second layer of that is, in order for this to be funded, the Muslim can supervise gang rape, drug gangs, violent crimes, thieving, and usury, loan sharking, all this stuff. As long as he doesn't individually do that, he can supervise a big team of people who are all doing that and reap the rewards from that, provided at the end of the period of obligation he has already disposed of those people in the correct way that pleases Allah, killed them all or handed them in to condemnation of blame. That's rule 5. Leading to rule 6, recommended knowledge. Here are the things that you can do that with. Here are the things that are recommended that you don't do that with, because only the higher up imams are allowed. And the things that are given to you as an ordinary Muslim are things in the Quran and things that support what's in the Quran. Things that only imams are allowed to do is things like maths, science, astrology, ecology, biology and stuff like that. So medicine and aerospace engineering, nuclear physics, computing and AI. These things are only allowed to be supervised and only by the imams. And you're not allowed to ask any questions because Allah knows best. So if you ask a question, you're saying Allah doesn't know best, in which case you are an apostate and a idolater, and other Muslims will fuck you up and kill you and your family. And then we get to Quran verse 666. O ye believers, protect yourself and your family from the evil fire, and always obey your Lord who is Allah. So this is a proviso put in there for the imams to know. If you have any questions about this, imams, because it is highly questionable, you are going to have questions, don't be making those questions known. And if anyone asks you, this is what you say to them. Quran 666, you say, Allah will burn you. Get your head down, do the jihad. And then you do it. And the final bit is about the Ghazali, the pride fits. When you're like a crime overlord and you think, oh my God, I'm like the best crime overlord ever. As a Muslim, you're not allowed to brag and boast about this. And if other Muslims see you doing this, they are to totter over to you, tap you on the shoulder and say, Mr. Imam, Allah will burn you for your prideful nature. And by the way, you'll get us all caught. So why don't you just, knock that on the head and stop getting us caught and just get on with it. Otherwise, I'll tell the higher up imams and you and your family will lose their heads. And I'll get your job. And then the reports and the warnings have been given. Therefore, everything keeps quiet and the operation keeps rolling until the end of the obligation period where they have to dispose of the dhimmis. That's rule 6. Then we get to the end of rule 7. This is going to be what I finished the video on. Subjects of learning outside of sacred knowledge. These are the things which are absolutely forbidden to everyone apart from the Ayatollah and his little friends. Magic, non-Islamic faith and reading of Bibles and Jewish Talmuds and stuff. Mysticism, teaching of sorcery and other religions is considered to be sorcery. Philosophy and non-Islamic theology, so you're not allowed to even think about arguing with the Quran. And those subjects are, by nature of them being exploratory questioning disciplines, they're going to be ending up questioning Islamic theology, which is set in stone. So they're evil and bad, not allowed. Astrology, astronomy, materials science, and anything which contradicts Islamic truth is completely forbidden, except by supervision from the Ayatollah and his little buddies. And the last bit says, for the purposes of considered exception, which is, the top imams getting away with stuff that nobody else is allowed, the Imam will refer to the life of the Prophet Muhammad, for only Allah is wise enough to adjudge these things fairly, which are considered official. And that's where we're going to end it on. Why would a religion have an official secret program which only the top imams can do, which is specifically designed to have nuclear weapons? It's specifically designed to have bioterrorist weapons. It's specifically designed to know about psychology and theology and physiology and philosophy of other religions, even though it's completely prevented from the ground level Muslims. So only the Dawah guys are allowed to know that stuff. And if you have any questions, you will have your head removed. And then it says it. This is literally what it says. For the purposes of considered exceptions for imams, right? So the imams at the top, other Muslims are going, you're not allowed to do that. How are they allowed to do that? Here's me thinking I can't have a car. Here's me thinking I can't go to be friends with my next door neighbours because they're Christians. Here's me unable to do anything, not allowed to watch TV, listen to music. This guy is building nuclear weapons, reading books, living with prostitutes. Why is he allowed to do it and not us? For the purposes of considered exception for imams, that's a rule, considered exceptions for imams, you will refer to the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And we know for a fact Muhammad was a law unto himself. Muhammad said he was made of the same substance that Allah is made of. So Muhammad is literally God in flesh for Muslims. And Muhammad made the rules up as he went along, and sometimes he went back on his own rules and broke them, and then made up a whole book to explain why you couldn't do that. The last thing it says, only Allah is wise enough to adjudge these things, which are considered, quote, official. So that means good Muslims are down here, imams are here, making sure the good Muslims are suppressed and they do exactly what they're fucking told. But the official quadrant of Islam is Ayatollah Mate's nuclear biotech. And you're not allowed to ask questions or know about those guys because they're equal in status to Muhammad. And that is why we have wars against these guys. They are psychotic. It's a pyramid marketing mafia pretending that it's a religion of peace, which suppresses its own people with violence and threats of, implied violence to their family if they don't enslave others. And the rule number one, as we saw 2 days ago, is to flood into every single country, completely suppress their freedom, remove every iconology, book, music, celebrity, or thing that their culture ever does well and destroy it, and condemn their society, and then kill them, so that Islam can take over. And what's the goal of Islam? To get to the judgment day, to flipping murder the whole rest of the planet, till the earth and destroy it all, because they think Allah's going to come down, rebuild it all for them when they do that. That's why the obligatory period has a shelf life. They're trying to get to it as quick as they can. They don't care how much they need to destroy. They'd flipping nuke the whole world if they had the technology. And that's why Israel done the right thing to get rid of Iran and their little nuclear bunkers. These guys are unhinged. This even proves it. They think this is moral law from God and they're the arbiters of it. So you can bet your last dime. If Iran got rid of 10 nuclear bombs, which is what they said they had enough fuel for, they would immediately bomb the major countries in the world so that mutually assured destruction would happen. All the other nukes would get fired. That's their goal. How do we know this? Because we study the Quran in all its different forms. We've done 8 different Qurans, they all agree. And now we know their physical law code in the current day, signed off by all of the current Islamic thought and moral leaders with their little seals, every one of them, and there's one in North America, one in Europe. They all agree this and they're doing it now. That's why we need to know this stuff better than them, collect our thoughts and our resources and get ready for when stage 3 of the jihad hits. We need to be ready to hit back. And I really hope I'm making that point to you well, and you've seen the evidence. This is not just me supposing. If you don't believe me, buy it and read it yourself. I always say, buy it and read it yourself, and you will know. that every single thing that I've said here is 100% true, and they are doing this now. They have been since the 1940s, and we are now through stage 1. We are nearing the end of stage 2. Stage 3 is the open jihad, when all bets are off and they flood into our cities with violence, open violence, and start exterminating us. If you don't believe me, buy it and read it yourself. So that's the end of it for now. That was a pretty powerful video, but I really hope that you don't take my word for it and that you do your own legwork. You research these things and you find out just how serious this is, because we have let time tick away. Like America are doing now. America think, we've only got the odd Muslim, they won't be able to do that here. Everywhere thinks that. Then you get 1 or 2 MPs that are Muslims, you get 1 or 2 mayors being a Muslim, and before you know it, you are overrun by Muslims using soft power to manipulate the top guys, and before you know it, you're living under an Islamic dictatorship, and it isn't even called that. They're calling it a social, democrat free country, a republic or whatever. Then you try and use your rights and you find out you don't fucking have rights anymore unless you're Muslim. So don't let it happen to you. Make sure you know this stuff, make sure you're prepared, make sure you have your network of people that are prepared and you keep in contact with them. And when the time comes and they try and spring that 3rd stage of jihad, we will spring that counterattack and we will win. We'll defeat this jihad and we will bring back morality and law and order like we used to have, and incidences of violent wars and gang rapes and drug crimes and all these other horrible stabbings and everything else, protests against reasonable people, the suppression of free speech even, all these things will come back now. That's what the goal of this is. So that's the end of it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video and you learnt something. God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. See you tomorrow. Dear Lord, that escalated rather quickly, didn't it? But we know what to expect from Without Lies, Islam Dies, the Quran of Allah, and everything that goes with it. So that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed that and you learnt something. God bless you all. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Bye 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 bye.